Who hurt you? 3 words, spoken in a voice so quiet it could stop a heartbeat. Michael Russo, the man who owned half of Chicago, stood in the elevator asking a question that would change everything. And Emily Carter, the housekeeper who had spent her entire life trying not to be noticed, realized that invisibility had just shattered like glass. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back. Back to the marble floors. Back to the midnight shift. Back to the moment before the blood. Emily Carter was 25 years old and had perfected the art of disappearing. Not the kind of disappearing people joke about at parties, the survival kind. The kind that debt teaches you. The kind that grief carves into your bones until you learn to move through the world like a shadow. Russo Tower Hotel, downtown Chicago. Autumn evening, when the city lights start to blur with the coming dusk. Emily polished the marble floors of the third-floor west wing, her cloth moving in steady circles. The chandelier above cast fractured light across the surface, and for a brief moment, she saw her own reflection looking back. Tired eyes, careful posture, a face that had learned not to ask for anything. Then came the footsteps. Leather shoes on marble, steady, measured. The kind of sound that made everyone in the hallway hold their breath. Don't look up. Keep working. Be invisible. The footsteps stopped. She could feel him watching. Michael Russo, owner of the hotel. A man whose name carried weight in every corner of Chicago. A man whose presence made grown men flinch. Late shift again, Miss Carter? His voice was low, controlled, like distant thunder. Yes, sir, Emily said softly, wringing out her cloth. Just finishing this section. Silence stretched between them. She kept her eyes on the floor. You work more hours than anyone else on staff, he observed. It wasn't a question, but it felt like one. I don't mind, sir. Another pause. Then the footsteps resumed, fading down the corridor. Emily exhaled slowly. Another night. Another shift. Just stay unnoticed. But staying unnoticed, she would learn, doesn't always keep you safe. The reason Emily worked 70-hour weeks was folded in her wallet. A hospital bill. Final notice. $48,317. Her mother had died 18 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The kind that comes with no warning and less mercy. Emily kept the invoice next to her mother's photo. A woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, taken 3 weeks before the diagnosis. A reminder. A burden. A promise she couldn't afford to break. She worked nights at Russo Tower and weekends doing inventory at a corner grocery. Her younger sister, Sophie, was an apprentice chef in the hotel kitchen. Together, they scraped by. Rent, food, and $500 a month toward the debt. 7 years. That's how long it would take to be free. 7 years of staying quiet. 7 years of staying small. The hallway was empty now, the chandelier humming its electric song. Emily gathered her cleaning supplies and headed toward the service elevator. Outside the tall windows, Chicago stretched into darkness. Rain had started, silver streaks running down the glass like tears. She checked her watch. 12:47 a.m. The night shift ended at 1. The bus came at 1:15. If she hurried, she could be home by 2. Just get home, lock the door. Tomorrow will be easier. It was a lie, but it was her lie. And sometimes, that's all you have. The rain was falling hard when Emily left through the staff exit. She pulled her thin jacket tighter, already feeling the cold seep through. The bus stop was 4 blocks away. Walking distance. Manageable. The alley between Russo Tower and the office building next door was the fastest route, narrow, dimly lit, but it saved 3 minutes. Emily had taken it 100 times before. Tonight would be different. 2 men stepped from the shadows near the dumpsters. Emily's heart lurched. She stopped, her hand instinctively moving to her pocket. Empty. She'd left her phone charging at home. "Evening," one of them said. Tall, broad-shouldered, a scar cutting down his left cheek. His companion was shorter, wiry, with eyes that didn't blink. "I don't have money," Emily said quickly, raising her hands. "My phone's at home. I can give you my wallet, but there's nothing in it." "Relax." The tall one stepped closer. "We're not robbing you." The shorter man smiled. It was worse than a threat. Emily's pulse hammered. The street behind them was empty. Rain hissed against pavement. "I need to catch my bus." "You work here?" The tall man gestured toward the tower. His gaze dropped to her jacket, the embroidered logo on the pocket. Russo Tower. His expression changed. "She works for Russo," the shorter man said quietly. Emily's breath caught. "I'm a housekeeper. I don't know anything. Doesn't matter what you know." The tall man's voice went cold. "You work for Russo? Consider this a gift. Say hello to Serban." The first blow hit her ribs. Air exploded from her lungs. She stumbled backward, gasping, and the second punch caught her cheek. Pain burst across her face like fire. She tried to shield herself, but one of them grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging so deep she felt bones grind together. The grip left marks, finger-shaped bruises on her pale skin. Then she was on the ground, cold rainwater soaking through her clothes. Blood filled her mouth, her vision blurred. "Get up." But her body had stopped listening. The 2 men loomed over her, their faces distorted in the rain. "A message," one of them said. "Make sure your boss gets it." Then they were gone. Emily lay in the puddle, rain mixing with blood. Her hand fumbled for her jacket pocket. The wallet was still there. Her mother's photo, creased and worn, stared back at her through the plastic sleeve. "I'm sorry, Mom." She didn't know how long she stayed there. Minutes, maybe. Long enough for the cold to sink into her bones. Finally, she forced herself upright. Every movement screamed, but she was alive. She stumbled toward the bus stop, leaving a trail of pink water in the rain. Sophie was awake when Emily opened the apartment door. "Em?" Her voice cracked with panic. "Oh God, what happened?" Emily tried to smile. It hurt. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." Sophie rushed forward, guiding her sister to the couch. Their apartment was small, 1 bedroom, peeling wallpaper, furniture from thrift stores. But it was home. "I'm calling 911. "No." Emily caught her sister's wrist. "We can't afford it." "Emily, we still owe $1,800 from last month's urgent care. I'm not adding more." Her voice was firm despite the trembling. "Just help me clean it." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She grabbed the first aid kit from the bathroom and began cleaning the cuts with shaking hands. "Who did this?" "I don't know. 2 men. They saw my uniform." Sophie pressed gauze to Emily's cheek, her touch gentle, but her expression angry. "You work for one of the most powerful people in Chicago, and nobody noticed you were attacked?" Emily closed her eyes. The apartment smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Rain drummed against the window. "That's the point, Soph. I'm invisible. That's how we survive." "That's not surviving," Sophie whispered. "That's just hiding." Emily didn't respond. What could she say? That invisibility was safer than being seen? That vulnerability meant risk, and risk meant debt, danger, death. Her mother had been visible once, had fought the diagnosis, had believed she could win. It hadn't mattered. Sophie finished bandaging the worst wounds and sat back, wiping her eyes. This isn't fair. Fair stopped mattering 18 months ago. Outside, the rain continued. Inside, two sisters sat in silence, carrying a weight too heavy for either of them alone. But by morning, that weight would shift. Someone was about to notice. Dawn came gray and cold. Emily stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The bruise on her cheek had bloomed overnight, deep purple spreading toward her jaw. She layered foundation, concealer, powder. It barely helped. It'll have to do. She arrived at Russo Tower at 6 a.m. for the morning shift. The lobby was already busy. Guests checking out. Businessmen with briefcases, the scent of fresh espresso from the corner cafe. Emily kept her head down, moving toward the service elevator. The doors opened. Michael Russo stood inside. Every instinct screamed at her to wait for the next one. But that would draw attention, so she stepped in, pressing herself against the far wall. The doors closed. The elevator hummed upward. Russo stood facing forward, hands in the pockets of his charcoal suit, his expression unreadable. 15 floors in silence. Then his gaze shifted, just slightly, toward her reflection in the polished steel doors. His eyes stopped on her face. The bruise, visible despite the makeup. "Who did that to you?" His voice was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that precedes storms. Emily's heart hammered. "I fell. Down some stairs at home." Russo turned to face her fully. His eyes were dark, sharp, the kind that saw through lies like glass. "You're a terrible liar, Miss Carter." The elevator dinged. 15th floor. Emily stepped out quickly, not looking back. But she felt his gaze follow her down the hallway. Heavy, assessing, and entirely too perceptive. What Emily didn't know was that Michael Russo had already made a decision. By the time she reached the supply closet, he was back in his office on the 32nd floor, standing before floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked all of Chicago. Franco DeLuca, his head of security and most trusted man, stood beside him. "Pull the security footage," Russo said. "Thursday night, north exit, loading dock cameras, full coverage of the alley." Franco's expression didn't change. "Looking for something specific?" Russo's jaw tightened. "Someone put their hands on one of my employees. I want to know who, and I want to know where they are." "Time frame?" "Between midnight and 2 a.m. Franco nodded once. "I'll have it within the hour." He left without another word. Russo remained at the window, his reflection faint in the glass. Outside, the city stretched endlessly, thousands of lives unfolding in secret, most of them invisible to men like him. But Emily Carter was visible now, and someone would answer for what had been done to her. Power, Russo had learned long ago, wasn't about violence. It was about knowing when to act and when to wait. But some things didn't wait. Who hurt you, Emily Carter? He would find out, and then the message would be returned. Emily was restocking linens on the 18th floor when Franco found her. She'd been working since 6 a.m., moving through her tasks like a ghost. The bruise on her cheek was visible despite 2 layers of foundation. Her ribs ached with every breath. Her right hand could barely grip the linen cart. But she was here. She'd shown up. Because showing up was what she did. "Miss Carter." Franco's voice made her jump. She turned to find him standing in the hallway, tall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. Franco DeLuca, head of hotel security. The man people whispered about, whose past was never discussed, but always implied. "Yes, sir? Mr. Russo wants to see you." Emily's stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. Did I do something wrong? If this is about the sixth-floor supply closet, I already restocked it this morning. "Just come with me." His tone wasn't unkind, but it wasn't reassuring either. It was the tone of someone delivering a summons, not an invitation. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt like descending into cold water. Emily's mind raced. Had she missed a room? Broken something valuable? Had someone complained about her work? Was this about yesterday, about the attack? Did someone see her stumbling through the lobby with a bruised face and decide she was a liability? "Please don't let me lose this job. Please. We can't afford for me to lose this job." Franco led her through a hallway she'd never seen before, one reserved for executives and people who mattered. The carpet was thicker here, softer. The artwork on the walls was real, not prints. Everything smelled like money and power and decisions that affected lives. They reached a set of double doors, polished wood, brass handles, the kind of doors that only opened for important people. Franco knocked twice. A specific pattern. "Enter." Russo's voice, quiet and controlled. Franco opened the door and gestured for Emily to go inside. She did, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The office was exactly what she'd imagined, except larger. Dark wood paneling that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. A desk the size of her apartment's kitchen, made from what looked like a single piece of mahogany. Glass walls overlooking the skyline, giving a view of Chicago that made the city look like a toy. Distant, controllable, subject to the will of the man who stood before those windows. Michael Russo stood by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. He wore a charcoal suit, tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. Even from behind, he radiated authority. "Sit," he said without turning. Emily sat in one of the chairs facing his desk. The leather was butter soft, the kind of quality that would last decades. It made her acutely aware of her cheap uniform, her scuffed shoes, the lingering smell of cleaning products that clung to her clothes. Franco closed the doors as he left, the sound final, like a cell door locking. Silence stretched. Emily counted her own heartbeats. 10, 20, 30. Finally, Russo turned. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe late 30s, though it was hard to tell. Dark hair with just a touch of gray at the temples. Sharp features that suggested both intelligence and ruthlessness. Eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes settled on her face, on the bruise she'd tried so hard to hide. He moved to his desk, but didn't sit behind it. Instead, he pulled a chair around to face her directly, sitting at her level, not above her. The gesture surprised her. Men with his kind of power didn't usually bother with equality. "I'm going to ask you a question," he said quietly, "and I need you to tell me the truth." Emily's throat tightened. Her palms were sweating. "Okay. What happened Thursday night?" "I told you yesterday morning. I fell." "You clocked out at 12:54 a.m. His voice remained calm, factual, but there was steel underneath. "Hotel security footage shows you leaving through the north exit. You bypassed the bus stop on your usual route. You walked instead." He paused, watching her. "When you arrived home 73 minutes later, you were injured. Bleeding. Your sister helped you inside." The air left Emily's lungs. He knew. He'd already investigated. had already looked into her life with the kind of thoroughness that made her feel exposed, vulnerable, seen in all the ways she'd spent years trying to avoid. How do you... I pay attention to my employees, Miss Carter, especially when they show up to work with visible trauma and obvious lies. His gaze didn't waver. Tell me what happened. Her hands gripped the armrests, knuckles white. The lie died in her throat because clearly he already knew it was a lie. I don't understand why you care, she whispered instead. I'm just... Show me your hands. What? Your hands. Let me see them. The request confused her, but something in his tone made disobedience impossible. Slowly, she lifted her hands from the armrests. Her right hand trembled. Across the pale skin of her wrist were dark bruises, the clear, unmistakable imprint of fingers. Someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave marks, deep enough that they'd darkened overnight to purple and black. Russo's expression changed. The calm professionalism vanished, replaced by something cold and dangerous. His jaw tightened. His eyes went flat in a way that suggested violence was always an option, always available, just waiting for the right provocation. He reached for the phone on his desk, his movements controlled, but his voice dropping to deadly calm. Franco, I need names and locations. 2 men, North Alley, Thursday night between 12:55 and 1:15 a.m. Full identification, current whereabouts, known associates. He paused, still looking at Emily's bruised hand. Find them before nightfall. Understood. He hung up and turned his full attention back to Emily. The intensity of his focus made her want to shrink, to disappear, to become invisible again. Tell me everything, he said, and don't leave anything out. So she did. She told him about the alley, about thinking it would save 3 minutes so she could catch her bus, about the 2 men emerging from the shadows, about how they recognized the hotel logo on her jacket, about the message for someone named Serban. She told him about the punches, the pain, lying in the rain trying to convince her body to stand up, about stumbling home and Sophie's tears and the first aid kit from the dollar store. When she finished, her voice was hoarse. Russo was silent for a long moment, processing, calculating, deciding. You should have reported this immediately, he said finally. To who? The words came out before she could stop them. The police? They would have filed a report and done nothing. Hotel security? I'd be fired for being a liability. You? She laughed, a bitter sound. I didn't think anyone would care. I'm nobody. I clean toilets and mop floors. I'm invisible by design. No. His voice was firm, absolute. You're not. He stood, moving to the window. Outside, Chicago glittered in afternoon light, a city built on power and money and connections, where people like Emily were supposed to stay small, and people like Russo were supposed to stay untouchable. You work for me, Miss Carter. That means something. It means no one hurts you without answering for it. It means you are under my protection, whether you asked for it or not. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Emily stared at his back, at the perfect line of his shoulders, at the way he stood like a man who'd never doubted his right to make such declarations. Why do you care? She asked again, genuinely confused. You don't even know me. He glanced back at her, and for the first time, she saw something human beneath the power, something that looked almost like pain. Because everyone deserves to be protected, Miss Carter, especially people who never ask for it. Especially people who spend their whole lives trying not to be noticed, because they've learned that being seen is dangerous. He turned fully to face her. But you're seen now. And that changes everything. Emily's eyes burned. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in front of this man. "You're safe now," Russo said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "I promise you. Trust me." Emily wanted to. She desperately wanted to believe that someone with power would use it to protect her instead of exploit her. That being seen could mean safety instead of danger. But trust was expensive, and she'd never been able to afford it. Still, sitting in his office, looking at a man who'd spent resources and attention investigating what happened to a housekeeper nobody else would miss, she felt something shift. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn. Franco found them in 3 hours. He stood in Russo's office, tablet in hand, his expression grim but unsurprised. In his line of work, finding people was less about luck and more about knowing which levers to pull, which sources to pressure, which cameras to access. "Cole Draven and Luca Varga," Franco said, pulling up photos on the tablet. "Low-level enforcers for the Serban crew. They've been running intimidation jobs for the past 6 months, mostly targeting small businesses that won't pay protection fees. A few assaults that never got officially reported because the victims were too scared to press charges." Russo stood at the window, arms crossed, his silhouette dark against the afternoon sun. The light cast long shadows across his office, turning the comfortable space into something more ominous. "Where?" "East Docks, Warehouse District. They operate out of a gambling operation on Pier 17. Serban's been using it as a front for loan sharking and intimidation services." Franco swiped through more information. "They're creatures of habit. Show up every night around 9. Usually stay until 2 or 3 in the morning." Russo was silent, processing. His mind worked like a chess player, always 3 moves ahead, always calculating consequences. "Serban's making a play," Russo said quietly. "The protection rackets, the intimidation. Now going after my employees, he's testing boundaries." "Seems that way," Franco agreed. "Word on the street is he thinks you've gone soft, that you're too focused on legitimate business to defend your territory anymore. He's wrong. 2 words. Flat, absolute." Franco nodded. "How do you want to handle it?" "Bring them in. Tonight. Quietly. I don't want this escalating into something that attracts attention." "And Miss Carter?" Russo turned slightly, his profile sharp against the window. "She stays here. 28th floor conference room, the one we converted last year. It has everything she needs. Sophie can stay with her. Post 2 security guards outside the door. They don't leave for any reason until I say otherwise." "You think Serban might try again?" "I think," Russo said carefully, "that sending a message through violence invites a response. And until I deliver that response, Emily Carter is vulnerable. I won't allow that." Franco made notes on his tablet. "The team can be ready by nightfall. You want me to handle the conversation?" Russo's jaw tightened. "No. This one's mine." There was something personal in his tone, something that went beyond business or territory, or the usual games of power that men like them played. Franco had worked for Russo long enough to recognize when his boss was operating from principle rather than strategy. "She got to you," Franco observed. Not a question, an acknowledgement. Russo didn't respond immediately. He stared out at Chicago, the city he'd spent 15 years building influence in, the city that had taken his wife from him, the city that he controlled more than most people realized. "She reminds me that there are people worth protecting," Russo said finally. "That power without purpose is just noise. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand between the wolves and the innocent." Franco had known Russo since they were teenagers, back when neither of them had anything but survival instincts and a hunger to be more than their circumstances. He'd never heard his friend talk like this, not since Diane had died. "Just be careful," Franco said quietly. "Protection can look a lot like possession if you're not watching yourself." "I know." Russo turned to face him. "That's why she gets a choice, always, in everything." Franco nodded and left to make arrangements. Russo remained at the window alone with his thoughts. He thought of Emily Carter, her bruised face, her trembling hands, her whispered admission that she thought no one would care. He thought of how she'd shown up to work despite being hurt, because showing up was the only survival strategy she knew. For 2 years, he'd barely noticed her. Just another employee, another name on the payroll, another person moving through his building like a ghost. But then he'd seen the bruise, and something in him. Something he thought had died 3 years ago when Diane was murdered in a warehouse on the South Side, killed because someone wanted to send him a message, had woken up. Not love. Not yet. He wasn't naive enough to call it that. But recognition. The recognition that some people deserve protection simply because they exist. That invisibility doesn't equal insignificance. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is see someone who spent their whole life trying not to be seen. His wife Diane had believed that power came with responsibility, that having influence meant using it to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. She'd run a foundation for domestic violence survivors, had advocated for better wages for service workers, had reminded him daily that his money and connections weren't just tools for building wealth. They were tools for building justice. And then she'd been killed. Used as a message. Turned into leverage in a game she'd never wanted to play. He'd almost broken then. Almost let the grief turn him into something cold and unreachable. But standing here now, thinking of Emily Carter and her quiet courage, he realized that honoring Diane's memory didn't mean hiding from connection. It meant using his power the way she would have wanted, to protect, not to possess, to defend, not to control. No one hurts my people, he thought. Not anymore. By nightfall, Cole Draven and Luca Varga would understand that. And Serban would get his response. On the 28th floor, in a conference room that had been hastily converted into a temporary living space, Emily sat on a leather couch and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. The room was surreal. Larger than her entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a small kitchenette stocked with food she'd never be able to afford, and a bathroom with marble counters and towels so soft they felt like clouds. Franco had been polite but firm when he'd brought her here. "Mr. Russo's orders. You'll stay here tonight. It's safer. Your sister will join you shortly, and security will be posted outside." Emily had wanted to protest, wanted to insist she could go home, that she didn't need this level of protection, that she was nobody worth guarding. But the bruises on her hand said otherwise. Sophie arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing her chef's apron, her eyes wide as she took in the space. "What is happening?" Sophie breathed, looking around the room like she'd stepped into a different world. "Em, this is insane." "I know. You're staying in a luxury suite in Russo Tower because, what? You got attacked?" "Because he says I work for him. And apparently, that means something." Emily's voice was hollow. She felt disconnected from her own life, like she was watching someone else's story unfold. Sophie sat beside her on the couch, taking her sister's uninjured hand. "Do you know what he's going to do? To those men?" Emily stared at their joined hands. Sophie's covered in small burns and cuts from kitchen work, her own marked with bruises shaped like fingers. No, and I'm scared of the answer. The words hung between them. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Chicago spread below them like a circuit board, lights beginning to flicker on, people heading home from work, lives unfolding in every window. Sophie squeezed her hand gently. He could have fired you, called you a liability, said you'd become a problem he didn't want to deal with. But he didn't. I know. He's protecting you. Actually protecting you, not just saying nice things and doing nothing. He's actually doing something. Emily thought of Russo's office, of the way he'd pulled his chair around to sit at her level instead of looming over her from behind his desk. Thought of how he'd looked at the bruises on her hand with an expression that suggested violence was being calculated, measured, prepared. What if this makes things worse? Emily whispered. What if Serban retaliates? What if more people get hurt because of me? You didn't start this, Sophie said firmly. They did. They chose to hurt you. Russo is choosing to respond. None of that is your fault. Emily wanted to believe her, but guilt was a familiar weight, and it settled over her shoulders like an old coat. A knock came at the door. Both sisters jumped. One of the security guards, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and an alert posture, poked her head in. Just checking if you need anything. Food, drinks, extra blankets. We're okay, Emily said. Thank you. The guard nodded and closed the door. Sophie looked at her sister. This is so weird. I know. But also kind of amazing? I mean, someone with actual power actually caring about what happens to you? Emily closed her eyes. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of climate control and the distant sounds of the city outside. Somewhere out there, Michael Russo was preparing to deliver justice, and Emily Carter, invisible, careful, quiet Emily Carter, was at the center of it all. By dawn, everything would be different. By dawn, she would have to decide if being seen was worth the price. The old wine cellar beneath Russo Tower hadn't been used in years. It was cold, brick-walled, lit by a single overhead bulb that cast harsh yellow light across concrete floors. Cole Draven and Luca Varga sat bound to chairs in the center of the room. Russo entered alone. He didn't speak immediately. He simply walked around them, slow and measured, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Cole spat blood onto the floor. You're making a mistake. Am I? Serban's going to come for you. Serban, Russo interrupted calmly, has overestimated his reach, and you've overestimated your value. He stopped in front of Cole, leaning down to meet his eyes. You put your hands on an innocent woman, a woman under my protection, a woman who never harmed anyone. His voice dropped. Give me one reason why I shouldn't let my associate handle this the old way. Luca whimpered. Cole stayed silent, jaw clenched. Who gave the order? Russo asked. We were just... Who gave the order? Serban, Cole's voice cracked. He wanted to send you a message, said you were pushing into his territory, said we should make an example. Russo straightened, his face unreadable in the dim light. The message is received, he said quietly. Now I will send it back. He moved toward the door where Franco waited in shadow. That's when he sensed movement behind him. Emily stood just beyond the threshold, half hidden in the stairwell darkness, her face pale, eyes wide. She'd followed the voices, needed to understand what justice looked like in his world. Franco glanced at Russo, who had already noticed her presence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Russo spoke, his voice still calm. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," Emily whispered, "but I need to see." He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Come inside." She stepped into the cellar slowly, her gaze moving from the bound men to Russo. The contrast was stark, violence restrained, power controlled. Russo turned back to Cole and Luca. "You will not die tonight," he said. "But you will carry this memory for the rest of your lives. You will remember that actions have consequences. That power without principle is just cruelty." He paused. "And cruelty always answers to justice." He gestured to Franco, who moved forward. "Franco will escort you to the city limits. You will leave Chicago tonight. You will not return. If I hear your names again, if I even suspect you've touched another innocent person, there will be no conversation, no mercy." Both men nodded frantically. Russo moved to Emily's side, his hand gently touching her shoulder. "Come," he said softly. "You've seen enough." As they climbed the stairs, Emily's heart raced. She'd witnessed something raw and terrible and strangely moral. He could have destroyed them, could have inflicted the same violence they'd given her. But he chose restraint, mercy with a memory. She was both frightened and grateful. A man who wielded power like a surgeon's blade, precise, purposeful, and only when necessary. At the top of the stairs, she stopped. "Thank you," she said quietly. Russo met her eyes. "For what?" "For seeing me." Something shifted in his expression, softened. "Emily," he said, "I should have seen you sooner." Later, in his office, Russo stood at the window watching the city lights blur together. Justice without cruelty, consequence without spectacle. His wife, Diane, had believed in that. Before the betrayal, before she was killed in a warehouse, not unlike the one those men operated from. He'd wanted revenge then, had craved it like oxygen. But revenge was just grief with teeth. Justice was something else, something harder, something that required discipline. Emily Carter didn't need revenge. She needed safety. She needed to know someone would stand between her and the darkness. Not because she belonged to me, but because she deserved it. Somewhere above, Emily was probably still awake, trying to process what she'd seen. She called herself nobody, he thought. But I see her now. And that changed everything. The knock came at 6:47 a.m. Emily had been awake for over an hour, unable to sleep. Sophie had already left for morning prep in the kitchen. The apartment was quiet, except for distant traffic sounds. She opened the door cautiously. Michael Russo stood in the hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Mr. Russo? May I come in?" She stepped aside, too stunned to speak. He entered, glancing around the modest space. Worn furniture, secondhand everything, but clean and cared for. His gaze lingered on the framed photo of Emily's mother on the bookshelf. "I wanted to speak with you," he said, setting the coffees on the small table, away from the hotel. Emily closed the door, her pulse racing. "What happened last night?" "It's been resolved. The men who hurt you are gone from Chicago. They won't return." Relief and apprehension tangled in her chest. "What did you do?" "What was necessary, no more, no less." He gestured to the couch. "Please, sit." They sat, morning light filtering through thin curtains, casting soft gold across the room. Russo handed her one of the coffees. She took it, hands trembling slightly. "This wasn't your responsibility," she whispered. "Yes," he said simply. "It was." Silence settled. Not uncomfortable, just weighted with things unsaid. I spent 3 years believing that distance equaled strength, Russo began, his gaze on the window. That if I didn't let anyone close, I couldn't be hurt again. Emily listened, barely breathing. My wife died because someone I trusted used her to send a message to me. I was too late to stop it. His voice remained steady, but pain lived beneath it. I swore I'd never let that happen again, that I'd never care enough to be vulnerable. He turned to look at her, and then you walked into my elevator with a bruise on your face, lying about falling downstairs, and something in me shifted. He paused. Caring isn't weakness. Distance isn't strength. And protection isn't about control. It's about choice. Emily's throat tightened. Why me? Because you remind me that goodness still exists, that some people carry impossible burdens and still show up with kindness in their eyes. He smiled faintly. You thought you were invisible, Emily. But you never were. I just wasn't looking. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I don't know how to be seen. Neither do I, Russo said quietly. But maybe we figure it out together. He reached into his jacket, pulling out an envelope, set it on the table. What's that? The hospital debt. Paid in full. Emily's breath caught. I can't accept. It's not charity. It's acknowledgement. You've carried that weight long enough. But, Emily. His voice was firm but kind. You have a choice. You can keep running from the world, staying invisible, staying safe. Or you can let someone stand beside you. He emphasized the word. Beside you. Not in front of you. Not controlling you. Beside you. He stood, moving toward the door. Think about it. When you're ready, if you're ready, we'll talk. Wait. He paused, hand on the doorknob. Emily stood, wiping her eyes. Last night, what you did. The whole city will know now what happens when someone crosses you. Russo turned, his expression softening. Let them know, he said. Let them understand that cruelty has consequences. But you, Emily, you don't need to fear anymore. For the first time, you're truly safe. She smiled through her tears. For the first time, I believe it. His answering smile was genuine, warm, almost shy. Why now? She asked. Why me, after all this time? Because sometimes the most motivational thing life does is put someone in front of you who reminds you why you survived the worst days. He met her eyes. You're inspirational without trying to be, Emily. That's rare. He opened the door, pausing on the threshold. I'll see you at work, or I won't. Either way, you're protected. That's all that matters. And then he was gone. Emily stood in the doorway, staring at the empty hallway. The envelope sat on the table behind her. $48,317. Gone. Erased as if it had never existed. But it wasn't the money that made her cry. It was the choice. You can keep running, or you can let someone stand beside you. For the first time in 18 months, Emily wasn't afraid. She thought of her mother's photo, the crease in the corner from being handled so carefully for so long, the gentle smile captured forever. What would you tell me to do, Mom? But she already knew. Her mother had fought until the very end, had refused to disappear, had loved fiercely even when it hurt. Maybe it was time for Emily to do the same. The rooftop terrace of Russo Tower was closed to guests, but exceptions could be made for the right people. Candles flickered in glass jars along the railing, their flames dancing in the gentle evening breeze. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers, Something classic. Miles Davis, maybe. Or Chet Baker. Chicago sprawled below them, glittering and endless. 1,000 lights representing 1,000 lives. Emily stood at the edge, looking out over the city she'd always known but never really seen. Not like this. Not from a place where she felt like she belonged. 6 weeks ago, she'd been invisible. A ghost moving through other people's lives, cleaning up after them, existing in the margins. Now, standing on this rooftop in a dress Sophie had helped her pick out, she felt real. Present, seen, not afraid of heights. Michael's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. She turned as he approached with 2 glasses of wine, his tie loosened, his jacket discarded somewhere inside. He looked relaxed in a way she was still getting used to. The powerful mafia boss showing glimpses of the man underneath. "Not anymore," she said, smiling. "Though I'm still getting used to being up this high." He handed her a glass, and they stood side by side, shoulders almost touching, comfortable in the kind of silence that comes from truly knowing someone. "Sophie asked me today if this is a romance," Emily said after a moment, taking a sip of wine. It was good. Better than anything she'd ever tasted. But then again, everything in Michael's world was like that. Quality. Thought out. Intentional. "What did you tell her?" "That I don't know yet." She glanced at him, trying to read his expression. "Is it?" Michael smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "I think it's something better. It's a beginning." "Of what?" "Of being seen. Of being safe. Of learning that trust isn't weakness. It's a gift." He turned to face her fully. "Of discovering that sometimes the most important thing you can do is let someone stand beside you." Emily took another sip of wine, letting his words settle. In the past 6 weeks, so much had changed. The debt. Gone, paid in full with money she'd tried to refuse, until Michael had explained that it wasn't charity. It was investment. Investment in her future, in her freedom, in her ability to live instead of just survive. Her job at the hotel had changed, too. She still worked housekeeping, insisted on it actually, because she liked the work, liked making spaces clean and welcoming. But now she managed the entire department, with fair wages and actual benefits, and a voice in hotel operations. Sophie had been accepted into an advanced culinary program, fully funded. Their apartment was the same, but somehow it felt different, like a choice now instead of a cage. And Michael. Michael was complicated, wonderful, terrifying in the best way. "For what it's worth," Emily said quietly, setting her wine glass on the railing, "I see you too. Not the hotel owner, not the man everyone fears, not even the boss who protects his people." She met his eyes. "Just you. The man who reads philosophy books at 3 in the morning, who remembers that I like my coffee with too much cream and not enough sugar, who looks at me like I matter." Michael's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with hers, warm, steady, certain. His thumb traced the faint bruises that were almost healed now, ghosts of that night, reminders of what had been but no longer controlled her. "You do matter," he murmured. "You always did. I just needed to learn how to see it." The city lights blurred below them, soft and golden. Dawn would come in a few hours, bringing with it new routines, new conversations, new choices. But for now, this was enough. 2 people who had been invisible, one by fear, one by design, learning how to be seen, learning how to be vulnerable without breaking, learning that love, real love, isn't about possession or control. It's about standing beside someone and saying, I see you, I choose you, and I'll prove it every single day. Thank you, Emily whispered. For what? For asking who hurt me, for caring enough to find out, for making me believe that being seen doesn't always mean being hurt. Michael pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders, in a gesture that was protective without being possessive. Thank you, he said, for teaching me that some things are worth the risk, that closing yourself off might feel safe, but it's not living, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone in. They stood there as the night deepened, as the city hummed its endless song, as two broken people found a way to be whole together. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, still moments of doubt, still scars that ached when the weather changed. But it was real. And real, Emily was learning, was better than safe. Real was better than invisible. Real was worth everything. Love, the kind that lasts, the kind that heals, isn't born from grand gestures or sweeping declarations. It grows in quiet moments, in the choice to stay when leaving feels easier, in the courage to be vulnerable when armor feels safer, in the willingness to see someone truly, completely, without trying to change them or save them or make them smaller to fit your expectations. Emily Carter learned that she was never invisible. She was simply waiting for someone with eyes willing to see her. Someone who understood that strength isn't about carrying burdens alone, but about letting others help shoulder the weight. Someone who recognized that her survival wasn't weakness. It was the purest form of courage. And Michael Russo learned that true power isn't found in control or dominance, but in the willingness to protect without possessing, to care without demanding, to love without conditions. He learned that the walls he'd built around his heart after losing Diane weren't keeping him safe. They were keeping him isolated. That honoring his late wife's memory meant living the values she'd taught him, not hiding from the possibility of connection. Their story didn't end that night on the rooftop, under a sky full of stars and city lights. It began. Because the most inspirational truth about love is this: it doesn't erase your scars. It doesn't pretend the hard things never happened. It doesn't promise that life will suddenly become easy or pain-free or simple. Instead, it teaches you that scars are proof you survived, that surviving matters, that the journey from invisible to seen, from isolated to connected, from merely existing to truly living, that journey is sacred. And when survival is shared, when two people look at each other and say, I see your wounds and I'm not afraid, I see your strength and I'm in awe, I see you and I choose you, that becomes something more than romance. That becomes redemption. By dawn, every man in Chicago knew Emily Carter's name, not as a victim, but as a woman who chose to be seen, who had the courage to let someone stand beside her, who transformed her pain into purpose. And Michael Russo, the man who had forgotten how to feel, who had built an empire on power and influence and control, remembered something his wife had told him years ago. The most revolutionary thing you can do in a cruel world is choose gentleness. Choose protection. Choose to see the people others ignore. Home isn't a place with walls and doors and a mailbox. Home is a person who looks at you, really looks at you, past the masks and defenses and survival strategies, and says, you're safe now. You're valued. You're seen, and I'll prove it every single day, not with words, but with actions. Not with promises, but with presence. That's the kind of love worth waking up for. That's the kind of story worth telling. That's the kind of hope that makes surviving worth it. Because in the end, we all want the same thing: to be seen, to be known, to be loved not despite our brokenness, but inclusive of it. To find someone who understands that we're all carrying invisible wounds and who chooses to be gentle with ours while letting us be gentle with theirs. Emily and Michael found that. And if they can, two broken people in a broken world, carrying the weight of loss and debt and violence and fear, then maybe, just maybe, there's hope for all of us. Maybe being invisible isn't the only way to survive. Maybe being seen is how we truly live. Thank you for spending this hour with Emily and Michael. If their story moved you, if it reminded you that even in darkness someone might be looking for you, subscribe and join me tomorrow night. There are more stories to tell, more hearts to heal. I'll be here, waiting. Until then, sleep well. You're safe, you're seen, and you matter.